they always say that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And I think this is one of those situations. So let me see if you buy in. So the Bronze Age collapse was a period of ancient history when many very established civilizations essentially disappeared within a couple generations. Recently, there's been a re-examination of all the different forms of evidence. So some of that being scientific evidence, some of it being archaeological evidence, some of it being an examination of the records of ancient history. They tried to kind of take all these little threads and tie them together to say, well, what does all this have in common? And two things kind of jumped out. Number one was climate change, and number two was what happened as a result of climate change, which seems particularly relevant to today. So the climate change that happened in that time period, which was about 1200 BC to about 1150 BC, so an insanely short amount of time, was a cooling effect. So weirdly, because of the cooling, there was actually droughts. And these were droughts that went on for year after year after year. But if you think about it, if the surface of the water cools, then that means that there's less water to evaporate up into the air, and thus less rainfall. Because of the lack of rainfall, populations who were rather smaller, and maybe they were nomadic, or maybe they were even fairly settled, but just on a smaller scale, were no longer able to farm on land that had prior to that supported them. And so they started traveling away from the areas that they had been because they could not survive there anymore. And they moved towards cities. There's conversations about Ramses specifically. And Ramses, if you remember, he pops up in the biblical records as well as in historical Egyptian records. And he didn't have a very easy time of it. His kingdom went through a lot. And some of the reason that does seem to have gone through a lot is because of these years and years and years of drought. And the drought was so widespread and so impactful that many ancient societies did not make it. They just didn't make it. Some of them were destroyed in rebellions. And you could see that being the case if people who are desperate come to a city and are turned away, are told, we don't have help for you, you're on your own. Well, you get enough of those angry people together and they're going to say, if you won't help us, then we'll help ourselves. Other societies, maybe ones that were more comprehensively planned or had more resources, were able to get through, except that it really also damaged them too. I mean, they went through all their stores. They started struggling for how to house and clothe and police and incorporate all these new people. And it essentially knocked them down off their pedestals and weakened them. And all of that came about because people were forced from desperation to ask for assistance from people who had more. And I am telling you that the people who were more willing to work with these new individuals and try to bring them in and add them to their societies and find ways to use their skills and talents or to retrain them for the things that society needed, they did better. And the ones that were rather cold-hearted, they got burned to the ground. They disappeared. Their languages are gone. Their records were smashed. their artifacts overturned and broken. That's something to consider as we look at what we do with people who are coming to us because of desperation, because of terror in their own countries, or climate change in their own countries that has forced them to have to pick up and move away from everything they've ever known on the off chance that another country might provide them a chance to have better for themselves and their children. Because while you can't, at least in some cases, stop everything going on with climate, you can certainly decide how you deal with the challenge. Whether as a society you hang together or you will surely hang separately.